The second big sort of topic that we went over today was this feeling, sort of dread, I would say, is maybe the best way of describing it. This feeling of dread that we as teachers might be missing too much on what our students are really doing when we're working through platforms like Zoom or other voice over internet protocol VoIP software like Skype or FaceTime or anything like that. Um, and I think that's a really legitimate concern, and I was happy that the person that raised it did. And the way that they talked about it was, I fear that I'm letting too much slide, or I fear like that when I finally get my students back in the studio, I'm going to find all these horrible habits that they've built up. And well, there's not a perfect answer for that. There are some things that we can do to help ourselves. So on the one hand, I think it's pretty important how you coach your students to set up. And so what I mean by that is, if you just have an angle on your student like we have right now, where you can see my face and I can see, well, I mean, I see my phone, but if you were standing here, I'd see you too. Then you're going to miss anything that's going on, like physically, that produces this. So, maybe you hear something that gives it away, that, maybe it's too sharp or something, so you can kind of think, well, usually that's this kind of problem. Maybe you dropped or something when you needed to just be there and let it fall. But you can resolve that by making sure that you can see them. So for me, to use this as an example, this is sort of where I like to coach my students to. I like having that face view so I can see them. Hi. But beyond that, see how they're doing, see if they're getting bored, or see if they're having a lot of fun, or the kinds of things you can read off of a face. But it's important, I think, to be able to see, because we play with our whole body, the whole body, more or less. You want to make sure that they're stable there. You want to make sure that they're not super close and they can barely move their arms in front of their body or anything like that. You want to make sure that you're able to see, are they doing this a lot? Is there a lot of that's going to get in the way of us being able to go quickly or move, with, great fluency. I'm going to stop that particular angle now. But so I think on the one hand, you can see probably how that gives a little more information about the overhand. You can give a little more information about the whole body. If they're really into it, they can set up other angles that are also handy, though I think they're more useful on the teaching side. So for instance, I like this one for showing like very specific hand shape stuff. So if I want to show, we have this kind of rolling forward and we're drawing a little kind of oval almost as we go up and down, and that makes it really easy to speed up. And they can kind of see the articulation of stuff as it's going. And they can see how things are changing, and it gives them that kind of close-up view that in a lesson they might just be able to kind of lean over and look a little more closely at what you're doing. Past that, this is, I think, a good time to say it's really rather important that you coach them towards getting some kind of external mic. Even if they have like a nice MacBook or something like that, they're still going to have onboard mic quality that's much less than almost anything you can buy that you can plug in. A fellow from Rock Out Loud, I think his name is Michael, he's very nice. He suggested this one in particular, which is from Fifine, if you can read that. There you go. And partly what he likes about it is that it has a little headphone jack on the back of it. And I might have shown this to you guys last week, so if I did, forgive me. But really, that's another example that I like that doesn't have the headphone jack in there, but is still pretty handy. Would be this guy. And it's, again, they're both about $50 mics. They both just plug in through a little USB out the back, which bypasses the need for anything like whatever, an audio interface or anything like that, because it's got one built in. But that, at least for the ear, will really ease some of the difficulties that come with listening to your students and picking stuff up orally, A-U-R. Past that, I think partly what that person was getting at when they brought up this fear of, what are we missing, is, or rather, maybe not what they were getting at, but something that contributes to it. And I often feel this, I imagine you do too. It can feel pretty picky and sometimes either mean or exhausting to really try and persuade a student to keep trying to work on a piece. Or no, let's try and get it a little bit better. And in person, you have all of these emotions and all of this energy that you're able to kind of pick up on and respond to. And you can take little short breaks, or you can do all sorts of fun, spontaneous things. And that's just not as simple when it comes to teaching online. And so I think we worry about preserving that mood, and so we let things go. We move past things before we should, maybe. And there's not, again, a perfect thing for that. Obviously, if we can find good ways to do games and things like that, like we talked about last week with the polls, or any other sort of programmatic stuff that you can bring in, like an app or things like that, great. That's probably a wonderful step in the direction of at least kind of lifting the mood so that you can get back into, yes, but we really want it to be rather than, or whatever it might be. But one thing that came up in response to that I thought was very clever is that somebody talked about having their students record things and send them ahead of time. And that way they were able to listen to what is often a much better recording than any sound you'll transmit over Zoom. And then they could use that as the basis of the discussion going forward in the lesson. And so with that, what I would say is we basically settled on a few different ways of transferring those files. So the top 3 that came up that are just straightforward, not necessarily going to cost you any money, though they may, in the first 2 cases, cost a small amount of money depending on how you use it. But Dropbox, Google Drive, and YouTube. And the idea with Dropbox, the sort of common consensus anyway, is don't install the app. It'll take over, it'll do all sorts of odd syncing stuff, and that is SYNC. And you may, much more quickly than you mean to, lose control of sort of where things live and how they live there. But as long as you don't download the app and let it do anything like that, it can be quite handy, very easy to share. Google Drive, similarly but not the same. It does have a file on your computer that is just the Google Drive file. But there's not nearly as much sort of behind the veil stuff going on that'll lose you and your stuff and just leave you confused and lost. As far as space on that, something that came up was that people often find their Google Drive is constantly full, and Google is constantly asking them to upgrade. And so one thing you can do to help that, and this is how I dealt with it anyway, I made a dedicated business Google Drive with my business email. And within that, I turned off all the auto upload stuff. So anything that gets in there is there because I put it there on purpose, rather than just every silly picture I take of my cats uploading automatically and filling it up with 50 megs or a gig of cat pictures. I really like my cats. So that's one thing you can do. And then otherwise, I have ended up, because I use it for video transfer, I have little files that I share with my students. I do pay whatever, $2 a month or something to, I think, make it 50 or 100 gigs of space, which is a lot if you're not fluent in kind of how that works. And then YouTube as a channel is also an option, and it seems like even kind of a nice one because it makes it really easy to share with any other family or any other friends or anything. Basically, the student starts their own channel and they upload it, and they keep it private maybe, or link only, that kind of thing. But that can be a fun way to do it as well. Then the other options that came up were a couple options that had more to them. So Musico and Collabra were the 2 that were discussed. And without getting deep on either of them, Musico on the one hand offers sort of like a teaching platform, I believe. There's a video component to it, there's sound component to it. You can also just use the sound component of it if you like. But one thing that is nice about it is they let you take little clips in video which immediately get sent over, as opposed to Zoom, like this recording I'm making right now, will only deposit on my computer when I actually stop the meeting. And until then, it's just sort of waiting in the wings. So Musico, apparently, you were able to take a video and then immediately transfer it over, and you can even end up with sort of like a library of videos that you've made in the past that you can plop over and they can see, and then you can discuss in the moment. It is a pay service, and you actually pay per student. I think it ends up being somewhere around $3 or $3 to $4, depending on how many you have and stuff like that. But it can be very handy, was sort of the takeaway that we got anyway. Collabra is a little bit more, I think, developed for departments than necessarily like individual studios, but it's a similar idea. You pay per student. It's got its own little app that works on Android and iOS. And the idea there, and it's Collabra, is COLLABRA, like collaborate, but an app, so they change it a little bit at the end. Um, and so for that one, its claim to fame is, on the one hand, it's a little bit of a practice tracker, because once the student opens up their app, sets up their camera or whatever, it does track how long they spend on there making the video, which, as the person that brought it up mentioned, they don't really care how long it takes them. They mostly just care about the end result. They want to see the video. But it is, it could be encouraging to see that your student really cared and spent a long time. Or even that oh wow, they were able to just sit down and nail it. Outside of that, it's apparently quite good at sort of facilitating transmission to third parties. So if you need to put something out to a competition or to some sort of recital or something that's going to be pre-recorded and then broadcast. And so that was another option that came up as something that was, interesting and worth looking into if you're looking for something to facilitate that, to make that easier. Probably the last thing I would say about it is, for any of this video stuff, if it's not obvious, if you have younger students, like, 5, 6, 7-year-old students, there's a really good chance that they'll need their parents there to help with that. And the argument I would make, if parents resist that at all, which my experience so far, they're all very happy to help, point out that you're making mementos. Like, you're making little recordings of their kid learning music, and like the time's just going to keep marching on as mercilessly as it ever does. And these are little snapshots. These are little moments in their learning journey, in their like introduction to music, and that's cool. And if it's not immediately, it surely will be down the line. At least to the parents and probably to them, the student. I know that one was a bit long, and I hope you enjoyed it. And again, if you did, make sure to subscribe and catch the next one. And otherwise, I hope you're all taking care and not getting too cold out there. Thanks so much.